Overpaying for anything sucks, especially socks, so why pay $45 for a single pair of grip socks when you can spend less than half? Pure Grip Socks Pro feature our best materials for optimal fit, moisture wicking, and performance at a fair price, just $16.99 a pair at puregripsocks.com.
So you want to go Nike in 2022? Well, here are your three main options. I can't believe those didn't fall on the ground. For those of you into leather boots, the Nike Tiempo Legend 9 Elite, featuring a kangaroo leather upper with memory foam inserts, a more traditional and deep central lacing system, a standard low-cut design as your only option, and a very Tiempo-esque FG stud pattern with blades in the heel and conical studs in the forefoot, retailing for $230. Marketed as more of a goal scorers / control boot option, the Nike Phantom GT2 Elite, available in low-cut form like I have here, but also with a DF mid-cut collar for an extra $25. This is a football boot with a full fly knit upper, micro or generative texturing scattered across the upper in all these little chevrons, and a more bladed style stud pattern that's a little bit like the Mercurials, but maybe slightly less aggressive. These retail for $250 in low-cut form and $275 for the mid-cut version. And then finally, the latest and greatest from Nike, the Mercurial Superfly 9 Elite, but also available as a low-cut Vapor 15 Elite. This is a football boot with the new Vapor Posit Plus upper, which is as thin as possible for that signature Mercurial barefoot feel. Great lockdown and responsiveness with a tight overall fit. The incredible air zoom tech through the forefoot and toe box area that gives this boot a springier sensation underfoot than anything else that I've ever tried, and the new reworked FG stud pattern that is pretty much as aggressive as ever. For mid-cut Superflies, you're going to pay $275, and for the low-cut Vapor, which is effectively the exact same boot without a collar, those will run you $250. And then really quickly, as an honorable mention, because it doesn't really get much in the way of marketing attention from Nike, but is definitely a top quality football boot, especially if you're on a budget, the Nike Premier 3 with its mostly kangaroo leather upper, very traditional design and styling, and of course a sole plate and stud pattern that again, definitely is on the traditional side of things as far as modern football boots go. These are going to run you $110, so in terms of value for money, they're really tough to beat, but realistically only for somebody that's either on a budget and or just looking for something really, really simple. That's the lineup, but which one should you pick? Well, like any other football boots, it really does depend on what type of fit and feel that you're looking for, but I definitely think there are some distinct differences between these three lines, some certainly better than others. I'm going to talk about what those differences are and even rank them based on my own personal opinion from worst to best. Really quickly, if you do end up finding this video helpful, please don't forget to support it with a like, and make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2022. And of course, if you are interested in any of these boots, you can pick them up below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the links down below. While I don't think it should be a major factor if you're trying to pick between Nike's current lineup, it is worth mentioning that the Tiempo is only available in one version, a low-cut model, and is of course the least expensive at $230, where the Phantom GT and the Mercurials you can get as lows or mids, $275 for the mids, $250 for the lows. And when you're talking about fit, feel, performance, pretty much everything that matters when it comes to a pair of football boots, there's nothing about the mid-cut ones that actually make them better. So in terms of outright value, the low-cut ones for $25 less would be the better value, but if you like the idea of having a collar, by all means spend the extra $25. As far as ACC technology is concerned, the Mercurials do have it. The Tiempos might have it, but given that it's an invisible technology and there is no visible ACC branding anywhere on the football boots, we can assume that ACC is not a feature. Where the ACC tech of the Phantom GT2 is trilingual, so if you play all around the world, this is going to be the most effective variation. If you do not want a thin barefoot feel on the ball, then the Nike Tiempo should be your choice out of the current lineup. The combination of kangaroo leather and memory foam doesn't just feel comfortable against your feet, it's incredibly soft and padded when making contact with the ball, not just in comparison to the Phantom GT and the Mercurial, but honestly in comparison to just about any other modern leather football boot that's currently on the market. If you want something that has that little bit of padding and arguably more protection than any other football boot currently available, the Nike Tiempo Legend 9 should definitely be your pick. While technically not a speed boot, the Flyknit base of the Phantom GT2 is very speed boot-esque in terms of being really thin and offering no padding whatsoever. This is not a soft sensation, it's not overly sock-like despite the Flyknit branding, which is typically associated with a soft sock-like sensation. It's pliable, it's flexible, don't get me wrong, but it feels relatively firm in terms of touch on the ball, simply down to how thin it actually is. And then of course the generative texturing on the surface, which you can see is scattered across the entire upper, is rough to the touch, is rough on the ball as well, but doesn't provide as much grip as you perhaps might expect based on how rough it feels against your fingers. There's definitely more grip on the ball from these than what you'll get from the Mercs and the Tiempos, but realistically, if you just want something that feels thin and no nonsense, that's kind of what the GT2 upper has on offer. Where the Vaporposit Plus of the new Mercurials is definitely the thinnest of the bunch in terms of Nike's current lineup, and honestly, I think just feels better than the Phantom GT if we're talking about thin uppers. It's pliable, it feels great against your foot. I know some people have some mixed opinions on the slightly wider shape that Nike have gone for this year, but I feel like the boots fit a little bit better than the Phantom GTs as well, especially with that central lacing system. And when the upper, especially when it's this thin, wraps your foot more closely, it just makes for a cleaner, more connected touch on the ball. If you want to feel every bit of the ball against your foot, the Mercurial does that as well as just about anything. As far as traction is concerned, from the FG stud patterns, things are pretty simple: least aggressive, most aggressive, somewhere in the middle. The rounded studs through the forefoot of the Tiempo definitely provide the most freedom to twist and pivot when your foot is planted. So if rotational movements is something that is very important to you and you like having those rounded studs, you'll prefer the Tiempo stud pattern over the other two. The stability you get from the bladed studs in the heel is great, and you still get that Mercurial-esque chevron toe pick stud. So when pushing off in a straight line, there's a little bit more bite at the tip of the toe than you would typically find from a football boot with rounded studs. I know least aggressive sounds bad, but this is still a really solid stud pattern, and ultimately it comes down to personal preference. Where the Phantom GT, as you can see, kind of features a combination of what you get on the Tiempos and the Mercurials, combining bladed and kind of conical studs. They're not quite conical in that it's split in half and then slid in opposite directions, but it ultimately ends up performing very much like a rounded stud. The studs themselves are very narrow in profile, so they dig into the ground quite easily, providing more bite than perhaps you might expect. And realistically, this is a stud pattern that feels very much like something you'd find on a pair of Mercurials. So if outright grip is what you're after, that's exactly what you're going to get from the GT2. Where the Mercs, unsurprisingly, are just the most aggressive. This year they've gone for this tri-star shape for the majority of the blades, really focusing more so on multi-directional traction rather than just pushing off in a straight line. And as you'd expect, they provide more bite than just about anything when pushing off in pretty well any direction. If you're looking for the most aggressive traction possible on firm natural grass, the Mercurials should be your pick. When it comes to sole plates, the Phantom GT2 layout is truthfully pretty uninspired. It's basically a split sole construction in that you have a sole plate and then a stud plate over top with this kind of bar connecting the front part and the back part together. But ultimately, it's a very normal feeling sole plate. It's relatively flexible and honestly doesn't have anything about it that truthfully stands out. It's not that it's bad in any way, but I definitely think it's the least interesting out of Nike's current lineup. The sole plate on the Tiempo is also a really simple design made from a single piece of plastic with a stiffener bar running through the middle, nice and rigid through the midfoot, super flexible through the forefoot, maybe a little bit firmer than what you're going to find from the Phantom GT, but ultimately very simple, and nothing about it really stands out other than the fact that it's a lot lighter than I think most people would expect from a football boot of this type. Where the sole plate of the Mercs, incorporating that new Air Zoom tech, is simply on another level, not just in comparison to the rest of Nike's own lineup, but in comparison to any other football boot that I've ever tried. It's a solid plastic construction with that anatomic shaping, nice and springy through the forefoot as you guys can see, but remove the insole and you look on the inside and you can see the 3/4 length zoom unit that really gives you this bouncy sensation underfoot. They tout it as a performance element, providing energy return that's going to benefit you in terms of how quick you are or how much energy you're using. That is not something that I necessarily believe, but the flow and the cushion provided without the underfoot feel of mushiness that you get from this Air Zoom tech is, like I said, unlike anything else. It's like having the cushion of a pair of running shoes with the low profile, connected and responsive sensation that the Mercurial line of football boots has established over the last 20-25 years. It's incredibly impressive, and I can't wait for them to roll out this technology into their other lines. For the time being, however, as far as sole plate tech goes, this blows everything out of the water. Which brings us to the weight, where for the sake of comparison, I have grabbed the low-cut versions from all three lines, just because the Tiempo is only available as a low, and all of these boots are in the same size 9.5 US. Which one, however, is the lightest, and which one is the heaviest? The results might surprise you. Starting off with the Mercs, and perhaps unsurprisingly, spoiler alert, they are the lightest of the bunch, 6.6 ounces, the equivalent of 187 grams. Like I mentioned earlier, the Tiempos are a lot lighter than you might expect based on the style of boot that it is, 7.5 ounces, the equivalent of 212 grams. And then finally, the low-cut Phantom GT2 Elite. These guys weigh in at 7.65 ounces, the equivalent of 218 grams, just a little bit more than the Tiempos, and technically the heaviest in Nike's current lineup. From a fit and comfort perspective, I don't think there's realistically a bad choice from Nike right now. However, there is a standout as being the least comfortable for me, and that is the Phantom GT2. Whether it's the shape or the off-centered lacing system that is relatively shallow, perhaps a combination of the two, it just doesn't wrap my foot the way that I hoped it would, where the Tiempo Legends, with its shape as well as its deep central lacing system, I think just fits really nicely. The kangaroo leather is also super soft on feet, and for me, it is the most comfortable football boot in Nike's current lineup. As far as comparing the two is concerned, there's really not much to compare. These feel quite thin, these feel quite soft and padded, so it is ultimately down to personal preference, but in terms of overall width, these would definitely be the two widest options from Nike right now, and as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing both of them in my usual size 9.5 US, so if you are looking to order, whether it's the Phantom GT, the Tiempos, or honestly even the Mercurials, going true to size is definitely what I would recommend. Where the Mercs and the Phantom GTs would definitely be the better comparison because they're both thin uppers with little to no extra padding. For those that have made complaints about the Mercurials feeling like they've gotten too wide with this latest generation, when you have them on feet side by side with the Phantom GT, there is no doubt that the Phantoms are much wider boots, especially through the forefoot and midfoot area. I think the Mercurials fit really well. They still feel like Mercs in terms of wrapping your foot very closely and providing tons of structure with the laces tied tight. They just feel really secure on your feet. But then again, that Air Zoom tech underfoot, it's really what separates the Mercurials, not just from the Phantom GTs and the Tiempos, but pretty much everything else. It's a level of cushion response underfoot that nothing else has on offer, and I just really love the way that they feel. From a comfort perspective, I'd go as far as to say that they are some of the most comfortable Mercurials Nike has ever made, certainly the most comfortable underfoot. So for me, between these two, it's a no-brainer. If you're looking for something that has a thin feel in terms of touch on the ball, but also want something that fits a little bit tighter, Mercs over Phantom GTs any day of the week. So after considering all of that, in my opinion at least, I think two of these boots are great and one is kind of just okay. It's not that I think they're bad, because that couldn't be further from the truth, but as the quote-unquote worst option from Nike right now, it has to be the Phantom GT2. In my opinion, it's the least comfortable out of their entire lineup. It fits the worst overall, and in terms of feel and objective performance characteristics, it's just lacking in comparison to something that is kind of a close alternative in a thin barefoot feel from the Mercurial line. And when you compare it to other options that are out there in the mostly or fully knitted category, I just feel like the Flyknit upper on this football boot is pretty lackluster compared to what we've seen from Nike in the past. If I really wanted something with a knitted upper, I'd probably go for the Future Z, whether it's the 1.3 or the 1.4. They fit better, they're way more comfortable, and they're significantly less expensive. It's not that these are bad football boots, they just wouldn't be my pick. With that said, I do think this new colorway looks awesome. awesome. In second place, based on objective performance and what I think fits and feels good, the Nike Tiempo Legend 9 Elite. I think this is the best modern leather football boot currently on the market. Not only do you get good quality kangaroo leather, you get a significant amount of it, especially spanning the medial side of the midfoot. They're incredibly comfortable, they fit really well, they're lighter than you'd expect them to be, and they're less expensive than the rest of Nike's lineup. At $230 for a pair of top-end football boots in 2022, while that is by no means cheap, it's a lot less than you can spend on some of the more, let's call them mainstream options. It's got an old school charm, but at the same time, it doesn't feel old school. To me, this is just a really solid pair of football boots. Which of course means the Mercurial, in my opinion, is the best in Nike's current lineup, simply based on the incorporation of this Air Zoom tech. I think this is a game changer in the football boot industry when it comes to overall feel and comfort. Whether or not it will boost performance one day, that remains to be seen. But on that feature alone, but also paired up with this great upper, with an incredibly comfortable fit, with this aggressive stud pattern in a package that is lighter than the previous generation of Mercurials, whether it's the Vapor 15 or the Superfly, you cannot go wrong with these. And if you were ever looking for a reason to switch into the Mercurials this year with the Air Zoom tech, it's the time to do it. But like I said at the start of the video, picking a pair of football boots very much depends on your own personal preferences. And as much as I love the feel of the Zoom unit underfoot in the Mercurials, and honestly just love the boots in general, given the choice to pick between these three lines for myself, I'd end up wearing the Tiempos.